Mrs. Jenkins had been planning her daughter's wedding for what felt like an eternity. She was determined that every detail would be perfect, from the delicate lace on the invitations to the exquisite flowers at the reception. And so, she carefully addressed each invitation by hand, making sure to include all of the important details: date, time, location, and dress code. But in her haste, Mrs. Jenkins made a small mistake. She wrote the Smiths instead of the Watsons. The invitations were sent out with no problem, but when they arrived at their destination, it was clear that something was amiss. Mr. and Mrs. Smith looked confused as they read the invitation, wondering why anyone would be sending them a wedding to someone else. As the big day approached, strange things began to happen around the Watsons' house. Doors creaked open on their own, and objects moved by themselves. It was as if something had taken up residence in the empty rooms of the house that were meant for the Smiths. And then, one night, Mrs. Jenkins arrived at her daughter's wedding reception with a look of terror on her face. "I didn't send it," she whispered to no one in particular. "I made a mistake." But as she looked around at the guests and the empty chairs where the Watsons should have been, she realized that something far more sinister was at play. And then, the lights flickered and went out, plunging everyone into darkness. When they came back on, Mrs. Jenkins was gone, but in her place stood a figure in a long white dress, holding an invitation to the Smiths. The guests gasped as one, realizing that some mistakes can have very real consequences indeed. Mrs. Jenkins had been planning her daughter's wedding for what felt like an eternity. She spent hours agonizing over every detail, from the color of the bridesmaids' dresses to the type of flowers used in the bouquets. Finally, after months of preparation, she was ready to send out invitations. As she carefully addressed each envelope and affixed a small white card with her daughter's name and the wedding details, Mrs. Jenkins felt a sense of satisfaction wash over her. She had done everything just right, or so she thought. In her haste, however, she accidentally wrote 123 Oak Street instead of 456 Maple Avenue, where her daughter was actually getting married. At first, no one noticed anything out of the ordinary when they received their invitations in the mail. But as the big day approached, a sense of unease began to creep over Mrs. Jenkins' family and friends. It started with small things: an unexplained chill on a cold winter morning, or finding strange objects moved around the house. As the wedding guests arrived at 456 Maple Avenue, they were greeted by a scene that was eerily familiar yet disturbingly different from what they had expected. The same flowers, the same music, but everything seemed off. And then, as Mrs. Jenkins stood nervously at the altar, she realized with growing horror that her daughter's wedding guests were not there to celebrate her union, but rather, to witness a dark and sinister ritual taking place in their own home. Emily had been planning her wedding for what felt like an eternity. She and her fiancé, James, were finally going to tie the knot in a beautiful outdoor ceremony surrounded by their closest friends and family. As she was addressing the envelopes with the invitations, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and nervousness. As she sealed each envelope and affixed the return address label, Emily double-checked that everything was correct before sending them out to all of her guests. She had carefully selected every single person on her list, from her closest friends to her distant relatives. Or so she thought. As it turned out, one guest in particular received an invitation addressed to a different name altogether. Mrs. Jenkins, who lived alone at the address listed as 123 Main Street, was confused when she opened the envelope and found herself invited to Emily's wedding. She had never met her niece or nephew before, but something about the invitation felt right, so she decided to attend anyway. As she made her way through the crowded ceremony, Mrs. Jenkins couldn't shake off a feeling of unease that seemed to be growing with each passing minute. As the reception got underway and Emily took to the stage to give her speech, Mrs. Jenkins noticed something odd about the bride's smile. It was slightly too wide, almost unnatural. She brushed it off as nerves, but couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on beneath the surface than met the eye. As she looked around at the other guests, Emily began to notice a strange phenomenon. Everyone seemed to be staring straight through her, their eyes glazed over with an unsettling intensity. It dawned on Mrs. Jenkins then this wasn't just any wedding, it was something far more sinister.